Hello everyone, welcome to another edition of Newsmaker Live with me, Kendall Burton. My special guest this evening, we have two of them. Elizabeth Lewis, the Director of the Division of Human Services and Family Affairs, along with Nyla James, family caseworker in that department. Ladies, welcome to Newsmaker Live. Thank you so much for being with us this evening.
Good night to you and to the audience.
The ministry under which your department falls launched a campaign yesterday called Break the Silence Campaign. Let's start by discussing what that campaign is about and what form it takes.
Okay, as you said, we launched this campaign, the official launch, but we had, prior to that, met with certain groups of persons. But the whole idea of the Break the Silence campaign, just as it says, is to get people to speak out with respect to child sexual abuse in particular and child abuse in general. We recognize that one of the issues that perpetuates child abuse is the fact that the victims do not speak out. Persons who are aware of it do not speak out. Mothers stay quiet, aunts, cousins, you just name it. And we do this by doing this, it empowers the perpetrator. And so the abuse continues. And so we have set forth together with our neighboring countries to move to this campaign which advocates on behalf of victims, which allows persons some kind of avenue to come out and denounce this thing of child sexual abuse. So certainly this is what we are doing in St. Lucia, running this campaign with full support from UNICEF. You notice for some people they also call it the Blue Teddy Bear campaign because it has a teddy bear associated with it. And why the teddy bear? It is really to show some level of comfort for children. And so St. Lucia is just one of those countries, like the other countries within the Caribbean, facing this issue. And so we have moved now to do something about it, which is to get people to really come out and speak out against it.
You mentioned the fact that you were creating avenues for people to speak out. What are some of those avenues?
Certainly we want, in the case of victims, we want them to know that there are places they can go to. With respect to children, where it is that they can speak to their teachers, speak to a responsible adult, speak to the social worker or the family case worker, speak to the school counselor. The point we want to drive home is that you are not to remain quiet. Because as you do that, you allow the perpetrator, you give power, in fact, onto the perpetrator, because that is exactly what they want, for the persons or the victims to remain quiet.
Okay. Give me a definition for child abuse. What constitutes abuse?
Certainly it's as broad as a contravention of the child rights, as broad as this, and as narrow as somebody who goes to take advantage of a child, which is something that's caused pain and harm to a child. So when we look at, for example, child sexual abuse, this is almost clear in itself that you are abusing the child through sexual behaviors. And it can go as far as direct penetration of the child. It can be exposing the child to sexual and graphic information. For some people, they've always found it strange when you say as an adult, you should not be sitting down watching a television program or a magazine which involves a lot of sexual behaviors with a child. That constitutes child sexual abuse in itself, because now you're exposing a child to something that they're not prepared for. In some cases, we have some adults who engage in the sexual act in the presence of children. And so all of this constitutes child sexual abuse. When we look at child physical abuse, this is another aspect where we are going now to really, and I like to use the word attack the child. You know, we have some people who say, no, I beat my child, but I want to say clearly here, sometimes as adults, we attack the children. It cannot be that you are claiming that you are going to discipline your child and then we see blood in the end. It cannot be that a child comes to human services and you say to me the child was disobeying me, and then we're seeing a red eye, we're seeing blood in the eye. This certainly does not constitute discipline. This is really an attack, a physical attack on the child, which we look to as physical abuse.
But apart from the physical and obvious signs of physical abuse, what are some of the other symptoms of abuse and neglect that you can look for in a child?
Well, certainly one of the other forms is that of emotional abuse. And I always recall, even as a family caseworker, I worked in a particular area, and they didn't beat the children. There was very little sexual abuse, but I could tell you the sort of things they call, the names that the parents call the children from sometimes as young as 1 year, 2 years, and I mean in the local and Creole language. You would be amazed, and certainly if you as a parent is going to call your child this sort of names, you just goes to wonder what else. And one of the things we also recognize as we do that, we are tearing down the child emotionally. I mean, when a mother calls you a dog, a pig, and I'm putting it mildly because these are certainly not some of the things they say. Is it that we are setting the child up to become a dog or a pig, or even worse? So these are other forms that we see in terms of the emotional abuse, the sort of things they say to the children. Even as far as parents not allowing children to engage with another parent. For example, if there's a dispute within two parents, one parent who is a custodial parent of this child may say the worst things about this child, and of course align him with the parent, the offending parent. And we see that happening a lot in the case, and I'm sure Miss James will tell you what they see as she works directly with those cases.
Yeah, that's a good time to bring Nyla in. Let's talk a little bit about neglect. At what age, for instance, can a child be legally left alone before it is constituted as neglect?
Okay, well, I would say 12, 11, 12, going on to a teenager, because then they're more mature. They're more mature and they're able to make, I wouldn't say sound decisions, but let's say in case of a fire, a 12-year-old, 13-year-old should know what to do. A 12-year-old, 13-year-old would know, well, I shouldn't allow strangers to come into the house. But sometimes it depends on the maturity of your child as well, because you might have a 10-year-old who's able to stay in the house alone and probably cook because they were taught that by their parents. But it really depends on the maturity of a child. But I would say 12, 13-year-olds are able to stay in the house by themselves.
Is there a legal guideline to fall back on?
And certainly, as Nyla is saying, we also have to look at the level of maturity of the child, because you may have a 12-year-old that is mature enough and whom the mother has taught, or the parents have taught so well in terms of what to do, what to look out for. It also has to do with the length of time that the child is left alone. We have to be careful, because some parents will say to you, I have to run to work and I don't have anybody. I have a 12-year-old, I'm going to live with my 2-year-old or my 9-month-old baby. Certainly that cannot be allowed, because you recognize the challenges with possibly a 12-year-old taking care of a 9-month-old baby. And it happens, and certainly this is something that we want to disallow, because it means this child may not be prepared. And it just draws me to a case we had recently, because there was this child who really did not like the parents, not because anything, but he just felt that they had too much responsibility. They were taking on the responsibility of caring for the younger ones. And so for her, it was, oh, this is not my role, this is not my responsibility. I need to be a child. And so as parents, we have to recognize this, this as well.
What can I do if I suspect a case of child abuse or neglect?
Report it. That's pretty much what we're trying to encourage, to report it. Report it to the division, report it to somebody in authority who is able to report it. You could call, we have a childing hotline that is available to call, that I could say, it's 451 7777. It's pretty an easy number, so you could either call or come in and report the incident.
And can reporters remain anonymous? Is there a procedure that requires us to identify ourselves? What is the procedure?
Well, certainly, and Nyla will tell you, persons can call in and not give in a name. So they can call in, as you said, anonymously. You come in, you call in, you give us the information. This is all we ask. Give us the information, and as much information as possible that could point us or take us to the case. But if you give us what you have, and we try to work with it from there. The issue, though... But
what sort of information does the intake worker or the social worker need?
Well...
let's proceed.
Well, we'll need the child's age, the name, child's age, the location of the child, and we would need some sort of information, because we need some details to determine whether or not, or how serious the case is. Because we need to know some details, because it might be an emergency, it might not be, You understand? So you might just need to get the child's name information, and if you could get parents' information, but as much information about the child that you could get, even if it's school information. Because if you cannot get in contact with the child from at their home, you could also always get in contact with them through the school or through their parents as well.
We're talking about suspected abuse. So there's a possibility that I may think something's going on when in fact nothing is. Does the reporter expose himself to any sort of legal action? Can a reporter be sued, for instance, if on investigation by the social services department you discover there's no abuse?
Well, there have been instances where people report maliciously, where people do this, if they are upset with the neighbor, you know, they make some kind of reports. But, and in case like that, we really have to be sure that it was done maliciously, and it's not that they felt or thought that there was some kind of threat to the child. And so we discourage that. But certainly we want persons to keep their ears and eyes open. There are lots of things we can look at for, I mean, screaming, crying, and, you know, situations of children who are facing a lot of discomfort. Then they need to report that and allow us to do the investigation. And we will determine, along with the police, as to whether that is a credible report or not. But what we do not want persons to do is to turn a blind eye. Too many times we do that, and it turns out really, really bad for the child. And that is, if you know, in the case of child sexual abuse, as we speak of break the silence, this is sometimes what the perpetrators want. You know, they want the rest of us to remain quiet as they engage in the acts, and most times they know it is wrong. Most times they know it is illegal, but they want to allow it. We had a situation where a parent would take a child into a room, into a bedroom, to abuse this child, beat her, and ensure that the wounds were covered. Now, certainly somebody like that knows that they're doing something wrong to this child. And so it is only through the schools and the child speaking out that we're able to cover it up. But again, not even the neighbors knew in that case, because the child was brought into the room was locked, the windows were closed, and there was this child being battered and physically abused by the parent. But certainly we discourage persons from engaging in this malicious reporting if they're upset with a neighbor or if they're angry with their partner. But of course, we want you to recognize that you also have a role to play in reporting.
We want to discourage silence, but paint a picture for us about how serious the issue of child abuse is on St. Lucia. Give me some statistics.
I must tell you,
is it on the rise?
It is. If I recall, in the last formal report that we put together in 2010, and we've been collecting our data, we looked at least we had received the reports of about 257 reports of child abuse on the island. The following year, which would have been 2011, it went down slightly to just about 230. But certainly since then we have seen some sort of upsurge in the numbers, and it is mainly now the concern for us, and I'm sure Nyla will tell you, the concern for us really now is child sexual abuse and child physical abuse and neglect. These are the three areas that we are seeing showing their faces, their ugly faces out with respect to our statistics. And so it is not something that we can allow to go on. We recognize there are significant repercussions, not just for the child, but for the country at large, because now we are going to have a lot of, for want of a better word, damaged persons who we claim that are the future and who we expect to engage in behaviors that is going to be productive. And of course, if we continue
like us to
do
get
that,
into what are some of these repercussions.
Right.
But the common perception is when you talk about child abuse or child sexual abuse more specifically, the victims are most likely female. But we know that the male gender is also suffering child abuse. Give me an idea of the ratio or the difference.
I would, well, let's say for the year, I've not had one male sexual abuse case reported.
This year, 2013?
Yes, well, I'm for myself as a family caseworker. I know my colleagues have had, but I'm just saying for the year, I've had only females being reported. Not saying that it's not happening. I think it's the stigma attached to young boys being sexually abused, and they're afraid to speak out as much as girls would. Girls would probably do it quicker, but I haven't had. So I would say there's a ratio of, for every 10 girls who report sexual abuse, you'd find one boy.
Can you give me a...
Yes, certainly. I want to underscore the point that Nyla raised with respect to what we are seeing too in terms of the reports. Whether it is an issue of stigma attached, but we are seeing a lot more of our girls being victims of child sexual abuse. Of course, one of the things though we are also seeing is that the increase in male victims as well, but certainly not as many as the females.
You mentioned earlier the issue of parents or guardians performing sexual acts in front of children, perhaps giving them the impression that it's normal behavior. Is sexual activity between two children considered abuse in any way?
Interestingly, you say that. I was at a forum recently, and some countries are now looking at this because some said to you, okay, if you have two 13-year-olds engaging in sexual behavior, whom do you charge? Who is the victim? Who is the perpetrator? And so we have to look at this as well. With respect to our law as it stands, unfortunately, it is usually the male who is seen as a perpetrator and the female seen as a victim. And so the report is usually made against the male. But it is something that I know in other jurisdictions they are looking at with respect to the age factor. And I know in some countries they have looked at a 2-year age difference and say, okay, if the child is 13 and the other one is, let's say, 15, are they just engaging in normal sexual behavior? Unless, of course, it is a situation of rape, which you would know is certainly, I mean, goes beyond. But if it's that they have both so-called consented, one at 14 and one at 16, do we now take the 16-year-old and criminalize that behavior? It is an ongoing discussion as it is now, but for us it is always a troubling issue when we come across those sort of situations.
Any particular children at increased risk of abuse or sexual abuse?
Well, it's honestly, I would say you usually find it in the lower class. Not that it doesn't happen in the upper class, but I'm saying the lower class because most times we have instances, especially when the children are being neglected, unsupervised. You find that a lot in these type of homes. And I'm not saying that it doesn't happen in the upper classes, but I'm just saying because of the method, the manner in which they live, probably they expose the area that they live in, the community.
You can't afford a daycare, that kind of thing.
Right, and they're exposed to, I mean, the people in the area. And it's not always neighbors, but sometimes it's close friends, the people who are associated with your children. So you usually find in the, or I should say maybe they're the ones that report it, the lower class people. They report it more than you would find, because like I said earlier, the stigma that is attached to sexual abuse. You usually find that the people that we work with, our clients, are usually, most times, from the lower class.
I also want to add to that, because we have another group of persons, and that is children with disabilities. They seem to be a target group for a lot of our perpetrators. And a lot of it is sometimes because they figure, in some cases, the children cannot clearly articulate what has happened. And so our children with disabilities are a significant group of vulnerable persons, children, who are victims of abuse, and not just sexual abuse, all forms of abuse, and who seem to have no voice. Because, you know, as it stands now, you need to be able to give a report to the police and say exactly in detail what happened to you. And most times our children with disability, particularly those with cerebral palsy and other complications, who cannot articulate the issues, they get left behind because, of course, based on our laws, you need to be able to give a report and state what the color of the room was, what the color of the light, what do this, and they are unable to do that, and so persons clearly take advantage of that.
Yeah, the perpetrator playing on that silence.
Exactly.
Right. But who is the most common perpetrator of child sexual abuse or abuse generally?
Oh, I wish we knew that we would go after them. Certainly.
There's no face. There's no face to it.
It happens.
Yes. However, what we are seeing at Human Services is that in many of the cases, and I dare say 8 out of 10 in terms of the reports, the perpetrator is known to the child.
Yes.
It's very rare that we find it is a total stranger. And so known to the child in the sense that it may be an uncle, a priest whom they respect and trust, a nephew, a grandfather, a father, somebody that they know very well, a trusted neighbor. And this is also the very troubling thing about it, because it's sometimes some parents leave their children in the care of those persons, and these are the very same persons who take advantage and abuse those children. And usually the children then, that's when the silence really kicks in, because of course if it is my father, if it is my uncle, if it is my brother, then they go into all other issues of, my God, I don't want my father to be arrested, I don't want my brother to be arrested, I don't, you know, and then it becomes very, very complicated. And so they now feel they are the ones who have done something wrong, so they do not speak out because they are made to feel that they have done something wrong. So in some cases, the parents say to them, listen, don't say anything, because it's your brother. If you tell you know on your brother, he'll go to jail and so on. But I wish we knew exactly, if people had it on their heads, that we would know, and the police, I'm sure, would know who to go to, but certainly it's not marked on anybody's faces.
You make an interesting point about the complexity of the issue. How do you address the issue with a parent, for instance, who's raised their son or daughter to respect an adult, to conduct themselves in a certain way and hold the adult in a certain regard, to now encourage them to report that adult?
Well, I think that's part of the campaign, because if them not wanting to report it, it's almost like they're not the victim. It's not a bad thing being done to them, because I'm sure if something else is done, a child will come from school and said, well, mommy, my teacher beating me, or my teacher beating me all the time. They're able to report that because they figure it's a bad thing. But why wouldn't they report sexual abuse? Because they've not seen it as it's something that needs to be reported. Because the perpetrators put in their head that, okay, every time I do it to you, I'll give you something nice. Don't tell mommy, or don't tell. They convince the children that it's something okay. Although it hurts you, it's okay because I'm uncle, I'm giving you something nice, and if you tell, this and that is going to happen. So they make them think that it's not a bad thing that's happening. And that's what we're trying to do with this campaign, is to let them see that it's not okay for uncle or daddy to be touching you or making you feel uncomfortable in any way. That you need to speak out. Once you're uncomfortable with the situation, you need to speak out and talk about it.
I'm glad you made the point about school and being beaten at school, because we had the issue in the news recently. In one case, we had the parent of a allegedly bullied child hitting that child. In another case in Miku, we had parents complaining about a teacher abusing their child. How do you handle a situation like that?
Let me start off by saying...
Is it considered bullying if a teacher...
oh yes, bullying can take place in any form with anybody. But it's something that we recognize in St. Lucia, that persons don't seem to believe that children have rights. And so as an adult, I could do what I want to a child. You know, we grew up with this thing saying, girls must be seen and not heard, and we have all these adages that we use to, because like we said you must grow up to respect your elders, and you must make sure you know, and there's nothing wrong with that. We must teach our children to respect our elders. But as elder and adults, we have to also respect children. They are human beings and they have rights. People always seem to have an issue when we say children have rights. Yes, they have rights. They are human beings like all of us. And so when we in positions of authority figure, you can use this authority to attack a child in any way or fashion, it's something that needs to be dealt with in a very significant way. It's something that we cannot tolerate, whether it is a teacher, whether it is other children. We should not at all tolerate this kind of behavior. And so it is a situation that must be dealt with, regardless of who the perpetrator is.
But we had groups like Rise Inc., who Dr. Jacqueline Bird has been very vocal about ending corporal punishment at our schools. Do you see your department as having a role in encouraging the Ministry of Education to go in that direction, in light of what you just said?
Absolutely. We recognize, and that is the thing, some time ago, earlier this year, we had some discussion about it, because people seem to have these blurred lines between discipline and corporal punishment. Corporal punishment is not discipline. We have to discipline our children, and nobody and nowhere have we said that children should not be disciplined like anybody else. But certainly when it comes to a point where you're going to inflict pain, excessive pain on this child, this is no longer discipline. And this is where we are encouraging persons, and we will be engaging very soon with the Ministry of Education for us to start now to look at this whole issue of corporal punishment and to look at its implications. And are we getting the answers that we are looking for when we inflict corporal punishment on children? Is it working? Couldn't we try something differently? Sometimes we say, oh, we just pulling things from the US and so on, but sometimes we need to look at what is working in their society and try to use it down here. Sometimes we go for the negative things, and then of course everything else becomes blurred in that whole sphere. But there are instances where children are disciplined without the use of corporal punishment. And if we can take this on and recognize it, then it is certainly something that is going to help. I always want to go back, use little cases that we have. And I always recall one time, very early in my days at Human Services, when this young boy came there with badly bitten. It must have been about seven years. Really, really badly bitten, and of course the mother was up in arms. He's rude, he's disobedient, the usual. But this child said nothing else but one day. One day, one day, one day. That is all he kept saying, one day, one day. And eventually you say, but okay, what is this one day thing about? And he said, Miss, one day, I cannot hit my mother now because I'm small. But one day, somebody is going to get it. You see these licks, miss? You see these licks? And this was his exact name. You see these licks, miss? You see my skin? One day somebody is going to get it. There was this child already planning, because this pain that had been inflicted upon him, with the mother thinking she was disciplining him, he was already planning that he is going to get at somebody else and inflict that same level of pain on somebody. And we're talking about a 7, I think he was between 7, 8-year-old at the time. So we would need to look at all of those implications with respect to corporal punishment. For us as a nation, we need to take it on seriously in terms of whether it is working and what else can we use to discipline our children.
Okay, we're talking about some of the implications earlier on. One of those is that abused and neglected children, I have some facts in front of me, are more likely to engage in criminal behavior as an adult. Let's talk about some of the other implications for not dealing with this thing and nipping it in the bud now, so that we as a nation appreciate how it's going to affect all of us. It's not just a family issue.
I would say, in regards to the violence, when we discipline our children by I'm not saying by fighting with them, let's say that, like the little boy with the marks. I mean, in the future, he's already planning to hurt somebody, to hurt his mother. I mean, in the future, when he's older, when he's over 16 or he's 18, and he does that, he would be seen as a criminal. Or he learns the only way you could get your way or get somebody to do something is by hurting them. So we're teaching our children, when they're growing up, we're teaching them how to live for the future. So if you teach him that the only way you could get your way or you could get people to listen to you is to be aggressive, is to hit them or to, hurt them, eventually we would have criminals coming out of these children. And in the same way with sexual abuse, after a while, our victims become perpetrators. So it's like a vicious cycle going on. So it's true that, if we don't nip it in the bud and allow them to speak out, because sometimes children don't have a voice. They don't get the opportunity to speak. They don't get the opportunity to receive counseling for whatever they went through. And then when they get older, you see they becoming the perpetrators.
It's also true that victims of sexual abuse become promiscuous themselves.
Right.
Most likely, using protection. We have the issue of HIV, which becomes a burden on the nation as well.
Precisely.
Yeah. So there are all kinds of implications.
Right. And a lot of times when we encounter like young mothers neglecting their children, then you would do the investigation, ask her, so where's your mother? Is your mother able to take care of your daughter? Well, my mother left me from the time I was 3 or out from the time I was 4. It's already a cycle that's taking part. Your mother did it to you and now you're doing it to your child. So you're getting neglect and abandonment. It happened, her mother did to her, so now she's doing it to her child. By the time the child is 12, she's already sexually active, and then it's another cycle that's about to begin with that child.
Walk me through what happens to a child who is abused. The report reaches your department. What happens to that child?
Well, certainly what we have, let me start you from day one, we have the intake social worker. So the report goes into the intake social worker. If it is a telephone call, then we get that. But if it is a walk-in situation, a child comes in, we immediately investigate. So we ask questions with respect to, you know, the situation. And so we do what we call a determination of risk. If it is a situation that the child is, the abuse is taking place in the home, how do we now, we have to think of immediately the child's safety. Do we remove the child? What has to be done? And so in a lot of cases now, we may possibly do a removal of the child if needs be to ensure, because the whole point is to get this child in a safe place with immediacy. So we may remove the child if needs be, and so in removing of a child, we work very closely with the family court. So we go into the court and seek what we call a care and protection order, which is to remove the child and
so
put
social
the
worker
child.
cannot on her or his own just take a child out of an environment or a home.
Oh yes, that can be done. If we know if the child is a high risk situation, we do, and we will liaise with the court. We have at least 24 hours that before we can take the matter before the court. So yes, we can go in, and in a lot of cases we have the police would call in and say we have this situation. We go in with the police and we can do a immediate removal with the police once a child is in high risk situation. And so, like I said, we do that. We liaise with the family court if it's a situation that we place a child with a family member or in our foster care, because we do have what we call a foster care program, which is where persons come on, persons of good heart who open their doors, to children who are in need, and we place
how's that
children
working?
again.
I know you've been appealing for people to open, like you said, their hearts.
Yes, yes.
Have they been responding?
It's difficult because the challenge for us is really our adolescent children. Persons are very, very concerned in terms of taking young children. But when it comes to our younger children, the 0 to I say like 8, possibly 9 years, persons are willing. We are going to put an appeal out tonight for persons to come out further because we recognize there is need for persons to come out and open their hearts to children, because we have a lot of children who need a place of safety. It can be long-term, short-term respite care, where we call on you and say we need a child, you need to place a child in care just for the night while we do the investigation. And so we need persons to come out to assist us. But going back again to the process, so we will do that and remove the child. The child may go into our children's home if needs be, and the matter is referred to the police for the criminal investigation aspect of it. This is where the child may give the report to the police and so on. In recent times, we have been seeing a lot of cases where we cannot get family members because it has to be an adult with the child to give the statement. And what we have been doing at Human Services is when a situation where a parent or a responsible adult who is close to the child is not willing to or unable to, we sit in with the child to ensure that the statement is taken and to ensure that the criminal's investigation commences. So we work along, with along those lines, but at all times is to ensure the safety of this child.
Okay. Let me remind the viewers you're watching Newsmaker Live on DBS with me, Kendall Burton. Our guest this evening, the Director of the Division of Human Rights, Human Services and Family Affairs. I know you're involved in human rights, right? Child rights. As well as Nyla James. I want to call you Nadia so bad, I'm not sure why. Nyla James, the family caseworker with that department. The lines are open, so you can call us at any point to join in on the conversation. If you have any questions or comments that you wish to make, we'd be happy to hear them. You're talking about the interview process. What are some of the challenges that you encounter in that process, in actually getting to the point of prosecuting perpetrators? I know you have a number of those.
Getting the child to talk most times is an issue, because sometimes the cases are not, let's say it's not reported by the parent, and it involves one of the parents or a close family or friend. The child wouldn't have the support of her mother, or the boy wouldn't have the support of his mother. So it'll be difficult to get them to talk, because you have to give a report to the police officer in order for the criminal investigation to go on. So it's difficult to get, let's say we tell the parent, okay, we'll bring the child down at 9 tomorrow. That will be an issue, because they do not want their loved ones to be arrested. Then the child in itself, the child not able to articulate what's going on. They're not able to express themselves, in depend on the child's age, because the police usually want detailed information.
Okay, we have a call. Let's take that call. Good evening, you're on the air.
Hi, good evening.
Hi, how are
Hello,
you?
Good evening, Grace. Good evening.
Good evening.
Hi, I'm now tuning in. I'm not sure whether Mrs. Lewis spoke about the incident that happened in the school with the parent bullying a student. And my concern with is, and Mrs. Lewis, this question is directly to you. Do you believe that the judgment that was set was fair with a $2,000 bail, if I'm correct? She was charged $2,000.
Yes.
If we are trying to prevent bullying in school, and especially when it's coming from a parent, do you believe this was a clear message to send out there? Do you believe that they enforced the law enough, right? What charged, they charged the parent? Do you believe that was sufficient? And would that be able to send a clear message that this must never happen again? And it's like practically every other night the parent, the child's mother is on television pleading for the minister to come to her or to just meet with the minister because justice was served.
Yes, and let me respond. First and foremost, we must know what the penalties for such an action is, because the court, the judge, the magistrate cannot act outside of the law. So that must be clearly understood. So if it says the maximum is 2,000, then he or she cannot go beyond that. However, I think we can make a greater statement as St. Lucians with respect to how our level of tolerance if that kind of behavior, and it's not always limited to the law. If we as St. Lucian figure we are not going to accept and tolerate bullying at any level, whether it is in the school, in the home, on the streets, anywhere else, we need to stand up and start to educate our people. We need to educate our children. And so it is an action that we must not just leave to the law of the court and say, well, because if it were $10,000, who said $10,000 can make up for what the child is suffering right now? So the cost, the money that, the charges, whatever it was, it is, to me, is a small part. We as citizens, as St. Lucians, we need to stand up and say we are not going to accept this kind of behavior and start to educate our children. And as educators, as teachers, we need to know that we too can be bullies, and we have to be mindful of how we deal with children. Parents, it cannot be that we have a parent fighting with a child. We have to be very careful. We cannot allow that. And so we have a society have to take a stance way beyond what the laws would stipulate.
You want to add something to that? No?
Well, just to piggyback a little bit on what Mrs. Lewis was saying, the $2,000 is, the money is a minor issue compared to what the child is going through. And just as she said, the magistrate or the cannot act outside of the law. So it's really not much for us to say except that, it's the law and they're abiding the law.
Okay, we have another call. Let's take that call. Good evening, you're on the air. Good evening.
Yes, hello, good evening.
Hi, you're on the air.
Good evening.
I would just like the parent who went and get her like as though it's their own child, they beating the person's child. I can let them know if they continue that habit, one day they'll get a parent that will get on worse than them, because it's just that she got a bone. But I'm telling you, if she continues that habit she have of going to school and taking matters into her own hands and even beating the person's child, I think for now she just got the right person. She got a marshmallow. But the next person you see she do that, she has see how dangerous St. Lucia is now.
Okay, caller, thank you very much.
Good night.
Yeah, I don't think we want to encourage that kind of tit for tat kind of
Certainly
situation.
not, certainly not. And this is a comment I hear all the time, and people say to me, so is it that St. Lucia is becoming a nation of angry people? We have to be very careful when we want to just go and take actions into our own hands.
Right.
We have to always work within the law. We have to do that. And notwithstanding that somebody may have done something wrong, we always have to recognize that there are laws, there are actions that we can take, and not necessarily go into the retaliative mode and getting physical.
I think the
and
mother in
attacking.
this case did set the right example that we can follow. You have another call. Good evening.
Hi, good evening.
How are you?
Good
Hi,
evening.
hello?
Good evening.
Good evening.
Yes, I want to say good evening, Mrs. Lewis and Miss James. Good evening.
Good
Good
evening.
evening.
I have a comment. I really want to congratulate the Division of Human Services on the fantastic job that they're doing. I know many times they come under a lot of fire, and people don't realize just how hard the workers at Human Services, just how hard you guys are working. So I really want to commend you all, and also for adopting approach to child abuse and taking the stance and having this campaign, this Break the Silence campaign. I really want to say hats off to you guys, and I want to make an appeal to the private sector. I think it's really important for us to get the private sector involved in this campaign so that it will be a national thing, a national thing, so that we can educate the population, let the people know the dangers of child abuse, so that we can really curb this ill in society. Yes?
Yes,
Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
No
for
problem.
Really
Very,
appreciate
very,
it.
very good point. And that is, I really want to take this a little further, because we work at Human Services and people see it as a human services, so everything they say human services. It is a national issue, you know. It is
Right.
not a human services issue. When a child gets abused and that child is left in the society and, as you say, engages in promiscuous behaviors and high-risk behaviors and starts to get HIV and HIV spread, it is not just a human services issue. And so we have to take a national response. It cannot be left to just an agency, the family court or human services or the crisis center. We cannot leave it to a particular agency to deal with it. It has to be a national issue where we all are going to take responsibility and do what is right for our children.
And your department has a lot of challenges in terms of resources, doesn't it? How many officers do you have?
As it stands, we have what, 10 family caseworkers.
Services
For
on
the entire island.
For the entire island.
Yes.
That is the case. We have a clinical psychologist, just one, servicing almost all our clients, not almost, but all our clients, including children at the transit home.
Yes.
And she does a lot of assessment, which is very happy. At this point we are now looking to see how best we can bring on, because one of our gaps we recognize is not having a full-fledged counseling support. Our family case workers would do some level of counseling, but we recognize it sometimes go way beyond, and the person needs some very deep counseling and psychotherapy. So we certainly are looking to have this gap filled in terms of having counselors on board to ensure that, especially our clients who are at the lower spectrum of the economy and cannot afford counselors, and that they can get that support. We recognize, though, that there are counselors in the schools, and we want persons to know that, because one person say, well, my child received no counseling and so on. There are counselors in every secondary school, and then there is what we call a district counselor that works with the primary schools. And we want persons to use them. They are there. Use the services and ensure that your child and even the family gets the help.
Okay. We're talking about earlier the issue of money. In the case of the parent who hit the other parent's child. One of the issues you've had to contend with for a lot of the time is the issue of out-of-court settlements. We're due for a break. I want to take that break, and when we come back, I want us to talk about that. You're watching Newsmaker Live on DBS with me, KNo Burton. Our guest this evening, the Director of Human Services and Family Affairs, Elizabeth Lewis, as well as Nyla James, family caseworker. We'll be right back.